Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. We'll give it just a few more minutes to have lots of people join in, and then we'll start in the next 2 minutes. Thank you. So hello, everyone. I think we have quite a number of people who have joined us. So we'll kick off this very interesting webinar this afternoon. So welcome to the webinar, SupTech, How Can Technology Help to Achieve Better Policy and Regulation? A very interesting term, this SupTech. I think presenters will be more than happy to elaborate during this session. My name is Marian Kimani, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm the FSD Network Manager at FSD Africa, and I'm very excited to be hosting this session today. For those who don't know us, FSD Africa is a financial sector development program funded by the UK government, and our aim is to reduce poverty across sub-Saharan Africa. You'll also have seen a logo of the FSD Network on the webinar poster. The FSD Network is an alliance of organizations, or FSDs, that is financial sector development programs, that reduce poverty through financial sector development in sub-Saharan Africa. And FSD Africa is a part of the FSD Network. So just before we dive in to the webinar, just a few housekeeping items. We'd really love to hear from you during today's presentation. So if you have a question for our speakers, please feel free to send it through the Q&A tab. You'll see the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom player. And we'll be taking questions throughout the session as well as at the end of the session. If for any chance the Q&A tab does not work, then you can always type your question in the chat box and we'll make sure to address. If we are not able to address all the questions, then we will be sure to follow up afterward. Then we have today's webinar will also be available on our YouTube channel, and we will share the link after. Webinar with your social networks as much as possible. So without further ado, I'd like to kick off for the day. I have Annette Casabelle and Di Castri. Practice, and Simone under the morning was through the first part of the presentation. Thank you, welcome, and over to you, Simone.
Thank you, Mariam. Thank you for having me and Annette today. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you and to have an opportunity to spend the next hour discussing about SupTech and the work of BFA and Ragtag for Regulators Accelerator. BFA, it's a global consulting firm that focuses on the development of resilient, inclusive financial sector in emerging countries. It's a firm that works across the value chain of financial sector development through customer insights, consumer research, including the development of user experiences and interfaces that can improve the quality of the financial services for particularly low-income customers. Inclusive FinTech, which is the branch of our firm that is dedicated to mostly developing new technologies and applications for both incumbents, but also new firms, startups that are entering the financial sector, and not only financial firms, but also pay solar companies and other companies in the ecosystems that are particularly data-driven and tech-driven. The Business Insights unit works on the development of business models and products that are able to better serve low-income population, and the Finance for Life practice areas at BFA, it's mostly dedicated to give more meaning to financial inclusion, connecting the portfolios of the households with their real needs. And then finally, the work that I lead, it's the work on policy and ecosystem development. So we work with governments, with central banks and other financial authorities to be able to enhance their work on financial stability, integrity, consumer protection, and financial inclusion, but also on competition and innovation in this fast-changing world. So the R2A work fits within this work that BFA is doing to really try to harness the new technologies and data science to change the financial sector. The work that we are going to present today will be divided into 4 sections. First, we will talk about the vision for R2A. So you can't hear me clearly. I don't know what to do. Can you hear me better now? It's just a matter of microphone, or it's a problem of connection?
We can hear you, Simone.
Okay,
from this end.
Perfect. Yeah. I see. I saw there was one message. Mm-hmm. So after the vision, we will discuss the deliverables and of the project, and then the approach and what we have achieved. And we will make time after each section to take a few questions. And then there will be definitely time for a conversation at the end of the presentation. So we will have at least 20 minutes to take more questions toward the end. So the financial sector has changed significantly in the last 10 years. We have seen the mandate of the financial authorities expanding after the financial crisis in 2008. Financial authorities were at the beginning mostly focusing on monetary policies and the preservation of the stability of the financial sector, became more and more involved on other fronts, in particular on financial integrity, and it's been already for a couple of decades, and then on consumer protection, and increasingly on financial inclusion. And while this mandate was expanding, the financial sector itself was changing in a dramatic way. The ubiquitous connectivity, the availability of mobile phones, the possibilities that data opened up for innovation in the financial sector, make the pace of innovation much faster than before. We have financial sectors now that are very complex in terms of type of services that are offered, and new services that were completely unavailable only a few years ago, and also very global. So as we saw this change in the private sector, in the supply of financial services, and millions of new customers joining the formal financial sector, we haven't seen this modernization and this upgrade of the services happening in a proportional way on the public sector, on the side of the supervisor and the regulators in terms of their processes and the tools that they use to administer the financial sector. So for us, our vision is really to use technology and data in the future to allow supervisors and regulators to change and improve the speed, quality, and comprehensiveness of information that they can use to support their decision-making processes. That means not necessarily having more data. It's not the quantity that matters, although the quantity can really help in some cases, but it's the quality of the insights that you can extract from the data and how timely you can have information about your financial sector to be able to intervene, whether there are challenges or abuses or costs for the compliance that are unjustified. So trying to design regulations that are really enabling and supervisory activities that are risk-based, so that the few resources that are available to the financial authorities can be dedicated to those issues that matters the most. Annette, I think you have control on the slides. Thank you. So in October 2016, we launched the Ragtag for Regulators Accelerator with support from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Omidyar Network, and USAID. And the idea was at the time to start developing, pioneering new solutions to augment and not substitute. This is an important concept about technology, but to augment the regulatory and supervisory capacities of financial authorities in emerging markets. So the question that we had at that time was like, why there are new softwares that are available to banks and to other financial institutions to offer financial services to lower their compliance costs. But there's a very little innovation on the public sector side to improve supervision and regulation. And the reasons are many. In particular, there is for a startup that is very innovative, that is using new technologies, for people with really cutting edge ideas, the working with the private sector is quite challenging because of the structure of the demand of these services. For example, each central bank issued different RFPs at a different time with different characteristics. Often the tech specs for the solutions are not written in a way that is very clear to the startups. That's what we heard from them. There are challenges that are due to the length of the procurement processes and the cost of the procurement processes. The type of requirements that go into the RFPs often are already designed in the project only for big tech providers and not for the smaller but more innovative ones. the payments often are delayed. So there are a series of challenges that are keeping away the most innovative companies for entering really this space. And so what we wanted to do through the acceleration was, it's really a matchmaking exercise between those supervisors and regulators who are ready to experiment with new technology and the people, the innovators that are able to give the best technologies to the financial authorities. And it's up to you now to cover the survey.
Okay, so just building on what Simone has mentioned already. So our engagement with a number of regulators sort of like alluded to the fact of the challenges they're experiencing in managing data or processing data within their organization. So towards the end of 2017 and 2018, I mean, we issued or ran a survey to a number of financial authorities to essentially understand their data needs or their experience in collecting data, what are the challenges they experience in that process, and what are some of the needs they would want to address in the journey of data within the organization. So these are the number of financial authorities that had responded to that survey, and it's essentially validated some of the assumptions we had going into implementing this project. So just to summarize some of the key results that came out of that process, our learning from the survey and our engagement with financial authority, we had learned that the reporting structure for a lot of these financial authorities is still very manual and Excel-based type of templates, which has its own challenges both at the supervisor or financial authority side as well as providers of those data, because it requires a lot of time that financial services provider that would have to put into it, collecting that information and ensuring that it actually fits into the format that the financial authority is looking for. And in addition to that, there are also technical issues that are related to Excel itself. One being that it has limited number of rows that one could actually use to input data. So in that sense, it kind of like limited the amount of data that financial services providers could actually provide to financial authority. And in addition to that, as the survey summary indicates here, there were other challenges that are associated with data collection. So including delays in submission, as I mentioned, because it's a very laborious and time-consuming process, and it also got associated with some other challenges, including the fact that financial services provider would provide incomplete data or low quality data that is essentially unreliable to the financial authority, and being able to build or extract meaningful insight out of it to be able to make decisions. In addition to that, the manual process within financial authority included how the data is cleaned and validated once it has been submitted. So there is a lot of human intervention or spot checking of the data, and most of the financial authorities had reported that in the process of validating the data, one of the some of the challenges that they grapple with is essentially related to human error, of which these are the type of challenges that could easily be rectified by the existing technologies, the likes of APIs that allow automatic machine-to-machine transmission of information from financial services provider to the financial authority without human intervention or with minimum interaction of different staff along the process. So indeed, out of this survey, what we have learned, and as I mentioned earlier, it really validated a lot of assumptions that we had before starting this project or this initiative, is the fact that financial authorities are in demand of superpowers, as they call them. So these are technology solutions that can help them access better data that is more complete, for them to be able to enhance their data analytics capability and be able to feed that information into policy and regulation and other types of interventions. And there was more of like a consensus out of this survey that improvement in quality of data and analytics will essentially improve or would have a significant impact in financial inclusion and consumer protections. So these are some of the objectives that financial authorities are looking at, and I assume for a lot of us, these are areas of interest, depending on what sector we work in. We care about financial inclusion, and essentially this is the end goal that we are pushing towards with this project. And Simone, I think I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say that these are not only problems and challenges that financial authorities in emerging countries are facing. We have been invited to present the prototypes and products that we have developed, and you will see in the next section of the presentation. But we've been invited by the superintendent of banks in Canada, by the Fed in San Francisco, the Fed in New York, the Bank for International Settlements. These are challenges that are felt globally by all the financial authorities. I think we are really at the moment of important change across countries and continents when we talk about systems for financial sector supervision and regulation, because really the processes are very similar all over the world. I think perhaps security exchange commissions might be a little bit more advanced than the banking and payment supervisory authorities, but most of the things otherwise are really challenges that all the financial authorities are facing today. And when we talk about those challenges, we talk about challenges that, as Annette was saying, directly affect the quality of financial inclusion. If we think about something that could be seen as a very technical intervention for prudential supervision, which is the validation of banks' reports. Some colleagues challenged me, asking me what's the connection with financial inclusion. Well, if a supervisory authority is not able to process in a timely manner the reports that they receive from commercial banks, if they have to spend too many resources and too much time on those, they never get to validate all the reports that they receive from all the popular banks, all the SACCOs, all the other institutions. That's where most of low-income people have their deposits. And so the supervision of the non-bank deposit-taking institution often happens not on the base of validated data. So it's a very weak supervisory system, what is left for the type of financial institution they are serving millions of middle and low-income customers. If we think about solutions, and we will present them later, to be able to understand the experience of customers, that's really the only way that we can think today of moving from a policymaker and a regulator that is blinded without understanding really the customer experience, if not because of a very expensive demand-side service that can be realized only every few years. But we can give today tools to the same supervisors to have a better understanding of the needs and the problems and the challenges that financial consumers are facing when they try to use financial services. So what can be seen at this first look at something more geared toward prudential supervision, the preservation of stability, and or issues regarding financial integrity. All these issues are interconnected because the objectives of the policymakers and the supervisors are interconnected. And so we will see later a little bit like on the theory of change, really what are all the impacts. So the vision of the future that we have, that I mentioned before, of these central banks that are data-driven and technology-based, it's a vision that translates in a little bit in a possible blueprint that we have created. So this is a piece of our vision of the central bank of the future. That includes different inputs into the intelligence of the central banks. Inputs that are data from supply side, JTAG transactions, access point locations, information that is crowdsourced regarding the experience of the customers, and very importantly, the integration of data and intelligence between different departments and between different financial authorities. And all this information feeds into different functions, whether it's payments oversight, prudential supervision, customer and complaints department. But there is an important leverage that we can create if we start stacking this data all together and creating intelligence is broader than what a single department can see today. So we will talk about the project in Nigeria that is exactly this vision and this goal, while the other ones are serving specific inputs to transform the way data are collected and validated and analyzed. And in terms of outputs also, I mean, definitely, as I mentioned before, risk-based prudential supervision, market conduct, ML, and competition supervision, but also intelligence that can make regulation more proportional, tools to be able to really understand what's going on in the sandboxes. So why we're allowing financial service provider to test their products before we design regulation, if we're not able to really harness these testing opportunities to fully understand the potential and the risks of these new products. There is a group of supervisors, that the regulators, that is testing what's called machine-readable, searchable, and self-executable regulation, which is something revolutionary. That might create, automatize the whole regulatory and compliance process, reducing in a very important way the costs of compliance, and therefore making possible for the financial sector to mobilize more resources toward the design of better products and reducing the cost of the products and services themselves. Licensing processes that can be automatized, and then connecting the intelligence that is in the databases of the financial authorities, like the supervisory authorities, like the central banks, to the governments and the competition authorities to be able to monitor competition and intervene where we see some breaches, but also to be able to, for example, design G2P and P2G and other government transfers and payments programs from cash to digital. So designing that in an accurate way and monitoring the implementation of those programs. And then what we are working more and more, it's on the open data side. So there are entire data sets that can be made available to the public without any problem in terms of privacy, because these are aggregated data, but they can really drive innovation in the financial sector and allow the local fintech markets to grow rather than waiting or allowing or helping only the big fintechs like the global ones to enter our financial services. So we can move also the vision, and that's why there is a vision for the central bank of the future. There is no longer the central bank that is responsive to the challenges and problems in the financial sector, but it's really in the driving seat of innovation in financial services in their countries. So this is possible today because of the quality and the cost of new technology. This is what has changed. Like why now? Why this is the time? Why we have, and we would see that later, these R2A experiments with central banks, why that didn't happen 5 years ago, why we have an entire Ragtag and SupTech movement that is growing, so that today there are more than 100 experiments around the world. And when we started 2 years ago, really a few people knew the word SupTech. There were not many. And now it's something that is that the Bank for International Settlement has published papers on, that the World Bank is aware of. So this word has become mainstream in 2 years. The reason is that technology is being made available to the mass markets at a completely different costs, and we work with artificial intelligence. We work with natural language processing. We use, we would see APIs, application programming interfaces. We can develop chatbots. We can use completely new data visualization tools. Because now these technologies have all been tested and all available at a reasonable cost. What is missing is really a way to package them into solutions for financial service supervision and regulation. And those are, so meaning that the technologies are no longer looking for a problem to solve, but the technologies are serving really the needs of the customers in terms of central banks or financial authorities with similar functions. So that's the effort that we make, is really to work with the innovators to create solutions. So the problem is not to resolve the technological problem, but like now to create an application that can be brought in a safe way and in a cost-effective way to the financial authorities. And this use case go across the whole work of financial services authorities. So for all different departments, for so many different problems, there are available solutions to run policy simulation, to do predictive analytics, to understand the loan portfolios of the banks and other credit providers, to be able to connect with the customers, to identify and monitor the location of agents. There is really a range of solutions that can be made available. I mean, our approach is not to, when we do start working with the central bank, what we run at the beginning is really diagnostic, and we listen to all the different challenges the different departments are facing, and we map their data architectures and the data flow across departments. And there's never been a case where there was a problem and there was not an opportunity to sit together with our technologists and with the IT departments of the central banks and some innovators, and think about a possible solution that is based on new technologies. Even if that technology doesn't exist, we have the expertise today to be able to think of this menu of different tech that we can bring together to resolve that problem. And so I think it's very exciting, this work, because the the borders are limited. There is no constraint pretty much, if not very, very specific technology challenges that perhaps when we discuss at the end, I can mention one example where it was the problem, the tech. But otherwise, the tech is available. Now we need to make it useful for the central banks. Next slide, please. So we have created a database online where we track all the different experiments that financial authorities are undertaking with SupTech applications. So this database is available on the Ragtag for Regulators Accelerator website, and it's called the Solution Tracker. So you will see in this database information about 100 experiments and prototypes and products that are already being rolled out in the area of SupTech. And we're currently discussing about, with the Bank for International Settlements, about a full report of the different solutions and applications that have been rolled out around the world by financial authorities. So hopefully we will be able to bring the report to this community before the summer. So if you are starting to think about experimenting in one area, what I would really recommend is to check first who else is doing similar things. Who else has been testing similar solutions in this community, so that perhaps we can also join forces and learn from each other about the experiments that we're conducting to address specific problems. Next, please. Okay, so let's take a break and take a few questions, Marion.
Thank you so much.
Marion, we're having challenging hearing you. There's an echo.
Now?
Go ahead.
We have one question from Robert Ongodia, and he says, are there lessons that we can learn from the policymakers in developed economies? How have central banks in Europe and North America gone about this challenge? And then we have a question from Liana from Jopac, who wants to know a little bit more about the automated licensing process. What does it mean? How exactly does it work?
Thank you for these questions. So I'll be very happy to address them. So some experiments have been successfully run in the US and Europe on specific issues. So for example, when we talk about sentiment analysis means scrapping the information available on the web to understand what is the tone, what are the different words, adjectives that customers are using to talk about their experience. And different words and they correspond to a different sentiment, to different feelings that they have. And there is a whole body of academic literature that is studying how these can be used to predict, for example, real estate bubbles or credit bubbles. Just because of the single words that the customers are using when they talk about financial services, whether on Facebook, on Twitter, on their blogs, on their website. And people, talk a lot today, and they feel particularly free to talk online. So when we talk about sentiment analysis, for example, the Security Exchange Commission and Banca d'Italia are probably running the most advanced experiments. As I said before, the Security Exchange Commission in the US probably is the financial authority that is more advanced, together with the European Central Bank, and there are some interesting experiments with technology that have been done by the Bundesbank. But they'd say that they don't have necessarily resolved all the problems. When I presented the solution that we developed for financial reporting in the Philippines at a conference organized by the Fed in San Francisco, after I presented, it was the superintendent of Bank of Canada who reached out to me and asked me to go to Toronto to present to all his team the work that we were doing in Mexico and in the Philippines, because they were interested in the same solutions. So as I said before, many of these problems are global. I wouldn't say, for example, that the Fed in New York doesn't have some of the same problems that we have identified with the central bank in some of the countries where we focus. So I think there is an opportunity for global learnings and from also some of the lessons from the south of the world to be brought to the north of the world. And that's also the reason why, for example, the Bank of England and the FCA have decided to be the advisors of the Ragtag for Regulators Accelerator, because some of these experiments might be helpful for them, and if they see some solutions developed that are working, they might decide to adopt the same. The chatbot that we built in the Philippines, and we will talk about it in the next section, is the first chatbot available to a central bank with that type of quality and technology around the world. And not even the Financial Consumer Protection Bureau in the US has a similar channel that has been made available to customers. So I think a lot of innovation might be happening in Africa, in Asia, and Latin America, and not yet in Europe. So, Robert, I hope I addressed your question. So the question from Lavanya from Jordan, when we talk about the automatization of licensing processes, so if think about a new fintechs that needs to understand whether they need a license or not to be able to provide financial services. So normally what they do today, they send you an email or they call you and they ask you for explanation, and you point them at some of the regulation and start discussing and trying to understand what are they really doing and what is a piece of regulation that applies to them. And this is going back and forth and asking for resources on your side until the point when they realize, oh, yes, we do need a license. And so they start sending you the documentation for their applications to get a license. And this takes resources, particularly when you issue new fintech laws or when you issue new regulations that open up the sector to new competitors. All this process could be automatized if the regulations were easily searchable, if they were digestible through your portals, and their questions could be addressed by a chatbot that is able to read in the regulation and to pull out different pieces from the regulation that are relevant to the questions that the fintech provider is asking, understanding what the products are and starting to analyze the materials and the documents that they're submitting as they submit them. So at a certain point, there might and there probably is the need for human intervention to verify this information. But all this information can be cataloged and can be organized in a way that makes human intervention needed only when it's really needed, and not just to answer to the most basic question or to verify documents that it's easy for a machine in a second to understand that they're not complete or are not providing the right information. So I think the problem is really to free up time for human resources to intervene only when it's really, really needed, and otherwise to leave to robots, to the machines, to sort out issues in a much faster way when it's about the collection, validation of information, or the provision of some information to these firms. That's why at the beginning we talk about augmenting the capacity of central bank. This is not about substituting central banks with robots. And we know that there is this conversation in general about tech. Are we going to have humans in the future in their capacities, or all the war is going to be run by robots? We think that there will be always the need for a supervisor with 15, 20 years of experience on understanding their work and like going through the information that is needed, but they should not be wasting their time really in more basic duties that computers can have to do. I hope I answered your question. I don't know if there is any other question, or we want to move to the next section.
Please proceed to the next section. Yeah. We'll ask a few more questions at the next break.
So just to take you through some of the deliverables that we have completed. So far we have worked or completed 3 prototypes in 2 markets. And what you're seeing on the screen now is the prototypes that we have completed in the Philippines, Mexico, and we are in the process of finalizing a prototype in Nigeria. So I'll talk about them in details in the follow-on slides, but this just gives you a snapshot of the type of the solution we have implemented in this phase 1 of R2A. So starting with the Philippines, the first solution or a prototype we've implemented is a chatbot application and a complaints management system. And in building this, we have leveraged a number of technology to essentially use the chatbot application to collect and answer some question, as well as process that information using artificial intelligence, natural language processing, and machine learning. And all the information that is being collected from the chatbot is actually fed into the data analytics tool, and there is an interface of case management that the different supervisors can access that information in more digestible or more meaningful format to be able to use it in different policy intervention or regulation. So to just give you a bit of context or the background, or perhaps even why this type of a solution was relevant in the context of Mexico, of the Philippines, was before the chatbot solution was introduced, the consumer could actually engage or file complaints to the central bank through 4 existing channels at that point. So you could either call, make a phone call, or send a mail, or send an email, or actually walk into the central bank. And all this information would have to be processed manually at the data center and then stored into a database within the central bank. And you can imagine with these different channels, there were a number of challenges that both the central bank as well as the consumer would experience in their interaction with the complaints handling system. So for instance, these existing channels were becoming increasingly outdated, especially in the context of the Philippines, whereby mobile penetration is rising, as well as internet penetration is going up, and but the mechanism that were in place were relying on very traditional sources. But also there was a sense, or at least the perception, that it tended to have a heavy urban and more high income bias to it, in the sense that it had assumed a certain level of literacy. So for you to be able to send an email, you have to be able to know how to access that platform and actually send an email to the central bank. But also it had assumed that you could have access to facilities like a post office to be able to file a complaint. So with that, it kind of like limited complaints to be focusing more in urban areas, so more of the Manila central areas, and the central bank didn't have visibility on type of complaints or experiences that consumer are interfacing with outside of urban areas. And because it was heavily manual, it also limited the ability of the central bank to actually use that data to be able to understand the trends and the levels of type of complaints that are coming into the system. And also in a sense, it's sort of like affected that visibility of consumer risk or some of the market conduct risks that could have used or could have served as some of the early indicators to complement other prudential oversight that the central bank conducts. So in lieu of that, that's when the central bank worked with us to introduce this chatbot solution in a sense, just to essentially expand the type of channels that a consumer could have to file a complaint to the central bank. And because, like I had mentioned earlier, cell phone penetration in the Philippines is relatively high, as well as smartphone penetration is growing. So the chatbot can allow somebody to file a complaint either through a Facebook Messenger. So this information, you can go to the Facebook page of the central bank and be able to file any complaint that you have or from your experience with a product or a service or a financial service provider. But you can also use an SMS. So this is to allow for people who don't have smartphone. If you only have a feature phone, how can you actually use that channel to file your complaint? But also the other alternative is the fact that it's embedded, or it could be embedded in a web page of a financial institution website. So a consumer could go there and actually provides any information or file a grievance that now will be automatically channeled back to the database for it to be used later by the central bank. So that data could be analyzed and be used as a source of insights or information to understand the experiences of different consumers. And what we are seeing so far, or some of the early observations or impact of this solution, is the fact that now most Filipinos have access to these channels. So now it has expanded. The fact that the channels have expanded, it means that a number of people, so long as you have access to a phone, you can actually be able to file a complaint to the central bank. Also, in terms of the amount of time, as I mentioned earlier, because before the introduction of these chatbots, a lot of the work was done manually in terms of collecting the information and analyzing it. So now it has reduced the number of time that staff at BSP can spend in analyzing the data, because all of it has been automated, and you can focus on actually meaningful work, which is extracting insight out of the data that is collected. And from a BSP perspective, because the expansion of this channel, it gives the central bank visibility into customers' experiences and certain risks that could be arising, which essentially before this solution, it meant that only those who reported, of which it would have been biased towards the sector and segment, are the type of issues that would be visible to the central bank. And lastly, it's really from the central bank perspective, having a chatbot or expanding this channel of communication helps BSP to actually verify whether financial services providers are actually adhering or complying to different consumer protection and resolution mechanisms that have been put in place.
And I think before we move on, yes, just a couple of things to add. Particularly for the people working on financial inclusion, I think that we really need to think in a different way about the definition of financial inclusion, not just by adding access to financial services, but increasing usage. And so in order for that to happen, we need to make sure that the experience of the customers it's satisfactory, that they don't run into challenges when they try to withdraw their money from their accounts or to transfer their accounts. We know that the financial sector is one of the most untrusted sectors of our economy. because also people feel it particularly when there is a problem regarding their money. So I think it's important to think about universal access, but also universal access to avenues for escalating complaints to the supervisors and regulators where things don't work in the way they should with the financial service providers. Consumer protection should be democratized, cannot be made cannot be only for the elites that have access to internet or access to the headquarters of the central bank and therefore can file a complaint with the supervisors. And that's why I think the importance of having the same exact opportunity, whether you have a smartphone or retail phone, to start talking with your central bank. The other thing that is important to understand is what it means for this to be a chatbot. This is not a decision tree. It's not that the machine is asking you what my ticketing company for airplanes asks me. Are you flying domestic or are you flying international? Do you want to change your ticket or to purchase your ticket? It's a very limited opportunity of choice that I have. A chatbot means free speaking, means that I am the one, the customer, am the one leading the conversation and asking the questions that I want to ask, which is what normally happens between people. And therefore, it gives really opportunity to cover a lot of ground and many different challenges, issues that might be raising for the customers. And the other important thing is that the chatbot is learning as it's speaking. So the chatbots improve the quality of the conversation and the range of issues that they can discuss with the control and with the supervision of the people who are managing the chatbot. So there is a portal that the BSP has in order to authorize to use or other words. So for example, yes, yeah, yo, yeah. They all mean the same thing. They all mean pretty much yes, but there are other ways to say, and then you can add those and authorize in the chatbot to take other words into consideration as a yes or as a no or with other adjectives. And these chatbots are really smart. So one of the challenges in the Philippines is that people speak not only Tagalog, which is the most common local language, or not only English, but also Taglish. It's kind of a slang, a mix of the two languages together. So there is not yet a chatbot that speaks Taglish. What we are working on with the BSP and with Cinetic, the vendor that has been collaborating with us on this project, is for the chatbot at the beginning to speak in Tagalog and to speak in English. But as we go, the chatbot is learning to mix the two languages. And so it's learning to speak Taglish, which might be available later this year. So it's really incredible, the potential new technologies to make all these channels, all these type of experiences available to the whole customers. And then the importance of having intelligence and analyzing this data. If I see coming through, if normally I have a certain number of complaints for certain products, for credit cards, or for certain agents, or for certain regions, then we can put some thresholds in the system so that if there is a spike of complaints regarding either a service, a product, a type of channel, if there is a spike of complaint, immediately there is an alert for the supervisors that can go and check what's going on there. And this really allows to timely intervene when there are specific problems affecting a group of customers or specific providers. So the intelligence, it's incredibly important, because with other channels, it takes time to analyze the information, it takes time to understand and to get where the problem is. And with these type of solutions, everything becomes almost real time. BizNet, go ahead with the next solution. And just one last thing. Actually, the chatbot is not a prototype, it's a final product, pretty much. So we do work using proofs of concept, prototypes, and then production. But in the case of the data stack in Nigeria and the chatbot in the Philippines, we're really talking about the final product. And we'll talk more about the difference between proofs of concept, prototypes, and products later. Thank you.
So just to go to the next solution that we have implemented, this again in the Philippines. So here we have worked with the Central Bank of Philippines to implement an API and a prudential reporting system. Again, going back to some of the issues that Simone and myself raised earlier in terms of challenges with the reporting system. So for this specific solution, we are working with the central bank to streamline the data transmission and data processing and eventually data analytics, leveraging a number of technologies, including APIs. So with the API solution now, what has happened is that we have enabled a direct machine-to-machine transmission from the transactional database of financial institutions to the central bank. So information is flowing automatically without any human interventions along the way. And this has had essentially the objective or the idea behind implementing the solution, as I mentioned earlier, was the fact that BSP staff or supervisors were spending a lot of time on some of the tasks that are repetitive or laborious, and they were not adding a lot of value, which limited their ability to focus on the aspect of work that matter, which is building analytics and extracting insight from those analytics to be able to inform policy and inform regulation and as well as supervision. So what you are seeing currently is just a mapping of how the solution we have implemented look like. Like I said, it's an automatic machine-to-machine transmission of highly granular data from financial services providers, MIS systems. So this is their internal transaction database directly to the central bank. And in terms of what this has meant or what we have been able to accomplish, both from the BSP's perspective and from the financial services provider, is the fact that there's been a huge reduction in time that is spent in meeting or fulfilling compliance requirements. So for instance, now by shifting away from Excel template-based type of reporting to an API, we have been able to reduce the reporting scheme from 29 to just one unified reporting scheme. Because before then, when you had the templates, you would require different type of templates that a financial service provider would have to spend time inputting data, formatting it, and making sure it actually fits the requirement of the central bank. And from the central bank's perspective, somebody would have to actually validate the information to make sure it's actually accurate, it's consistent, it meets the need of the central bank. So that has been shifted at the moment. And in terms of amount of data that financial service provider would have to provide to the central bank, you see we have reduced by more than twice the amount of data points that a financial service provider would have to submit. And this is because with the template base, there were some duplicates, so some calculations that are no longer submitted, because since the central bank is getting more granular data, they can actually do those calculations on their end without having to require the financial service provider to calculate it prior to submitting. And lastly, in terms of just processing time that the data would take to move from the FSP to the financial authority, or in this case, the central bank, this solution has reduced that amount of time from 30 minutes to just about 10 seconds. And this is not counting the amount of time that is spent on doing workaround manual to ensure that the data is submitted to the financial authority or to the central bank in this case. So there is a huge saving. So the numbers probably, they might look small, but you can get a sense of like how much the central bank or the staff at the central bank would have to spend in actually fulfilling this, especially because these reports tend to come on regular basis. Either some of them are coming in weekly or monthly or quarterly or annually. So supervisors and regulator would spend a lot of time just trying to get the data in, as opposed to spending more time to actually extracting insight or information out of those data. I can move forward unless, Simone, you have anything to add, but the other solution that we wanted to touch on was the API and the data analytical tool that we worked with the CNBV in Mexico. So there's similarity of this solution to the API solution that we have done in the Philippines, except here the use case or the focus topic has been mostly on anti-money laundering. And again, this solution aim at streamlining the whole process of transmission of suspicious transaction reports and other transaction data from financial services providers to CNBV. And this has been done through API. And of course, the solution leverages a number of other technologies, including machine learning and visualization tools to be able to visualize that data in a meaningful way, in a digestible way. So just again, to give you a bit of a background of why this was relevant. So CNBV does conduct both on-site and off-site supervision, and it actually relies on data that comes from financial services provider. So this data before the implementation of the solution was coming to CNBV in either in plain text or in Excel-based type of spreadsheets that would be sent either via email, or they would be sent via mail in terms of like stored in the CDs and whatnot. So it entailed a lot of manual workarounds for the supervisors and regulators to be able to actually extract any meaningful insight out of that information, to be able to actually figure out now how to prioritize the financial institutions that they could go for further on-site supervision based on their risk profile level. And this was even more difficult because, as I mentioned, this data would come in different formats, and also within the within CNBV, the data would be stored in different sections. So CNBV didn't have visibility of cross-entity type of visibility, or couldn't have historical view of a supervised entity, and if there was any issue of anti-money laundering in the past, you couldn't go backwards and track it, let's say 5 years later. So there was a huge need for a centralized data portal and data analytics that would make the supervisors' work much more efficient, as well as enable them to be able to extract insight from that data to inform decision for which financial institution to conduct on-site supervision. So what you are seeing currently is essentially now what has been introduced with the solution we have implemented with them. Like I said, we have streamlined the whole process from how you transmit data, how you process it, and how you actually store the data and use it for analytics. So the API has enabled the direct machine-to-machine transmission from a supervised entity to CNBV processing engine, whereby the validation rules will check for the quality of the data that is coming in, the completeness, as well as whether it's meeting the specified structure. And then so the data that doesn't meet the validation rules that are embedded in it would be automatically rejected for the financial service provider to actually resubmit it. So you can see how efficient that process is become, and then the data can be stored in a database, a centralized portal, whereby authorized departments or functionaries can access the data to be able to deliver or generate analytics for making decisions on policy and regulations. And in terms of like some of the quick wins or the impact here, again, is mostly on the amount of time that it has saved staff from having to identify, let's say, certain types of transactions. So for instance, just to single out one of them, before the implementation of this solution, supervisors would spend at least 1.5 weeks to be able to identify transactions that are coming from Mexico to other low taxation geographical area. And you can see that has reduced by a lot, to taking for less than a second to be able to pick out those type of transactions. And also because the solution applies machine learning, it has enabled CNBV to have access or to come across or to bring out alerts that were not visible to a human eye before this implementation of solution. So we have seen that there is an increase in number of suspicious transaction alerts that are being picked out from the machine learning algorithm that is incorporated in the solution. And like I said earlier, part of the solution includes the visualization, so data visualization tool, which provide some of the smarter user visualization that were not there before, because it would have taken staff or within the central bank a lot of time to actually be able to generate that information and produce it in a way that it could be consumed by the different user. So now there is that front end of the solution, which brings data to the different user in a much more digestible format. So for instance, what you're seeing there, that map, is that mapping of transactions that are flowing from Mexico to different geographical regions, so low taxation region, for instance, which is much more, it's much more accessible than having somebody going through rows and rows of Excel or data to be able to figure out those patterns. And one of the last solution that Simone, I think, had alluded to it earlier in the presentation. So this is the work we are doing with the Central Bank of Nigeria, as well as the Nigeria Interbank Settlement System. So in this project, we are working together with them to build a data architecture that essentially tries to aggregate or bring in data or improve the use of data within the central bank, essentially. So it brings in data of different types, of different formats from different organizations, and aggregate them into a centralized repository. So all of this data is coming in through APIs, in which case we are bringing in more granular, more quality data that is centralized in one location, which is access controlled for the different end users or different personas to be able to query this data at will and analyze it and produce visualizations that are specific to their needs. So within the Central Bank of Nigeria, you could imagine the different end users of this type of a solution. So you could have people from payment supervision, for instance, or people from prudential supervision or payment oversight as the end user of this type of data. And now that the fact that the data is centralized, it enables them to actually drill deeper to a certain issue or being able to track certain alerts that are coming either in near real time or much more frequent, and being able to follow up on those specific alerts that could be indicating a certain market risk that requires the central bank or a user's attention. And another element that we are incorporating in this solution, so this is looking beyond the central bank and NIBS as the user of the solution, we are incorporating an open data element that Simone had alluded to earlier as well. So this is looking at what are the users and what are their data needs, how can we make this information available? So some of the users of this information would be the likes of Ministry of Finance. that probably has a number of government-to-person transfer programs that they would want to track. So that information could be geotagged and overlaid on a map to actually be able to see how the transaction or the transfers are flowing. Are they going to the constituents that the ministry intended to? Are they reaching the poor people as we intended to, or is there something else? And beyond government users, also private sector entities could have access to this open data. So you could imagine a scenario whereby banks are relying on this data to benchmark themselves against competition. So this data is open up for those different types of users. And some of the dashboards we have created, so what you're seeing on the screen, it's just a snippet or just snapshots of the different dashboards that have been created in the data stack platform. Like I said, the indicators or the charts and whatnot are specific to different type of users. So what you're seeing there, so for instance, is the potential supervision dashboard. And in this case, supervisors have certain number of or specific type of alerts and indicators that they track on regular basis. So this information now is brought close to them for them to be able to monitor it easily, as well as the fact that it's overlaid or it's sort of like layered with other type of data to give it more context and color to the specific environment. So I'll pause here unless, Simone, you have anything else to add or if there are any questions.
Yes, let's take two questions just before we proceed. We have one from Rahel Kidane from Enterprise Partners in Ethiopia. And she asks, has there been any work done in real-time Forex demand and allocation processes in emerging markets, specifically in markets with managed economies? And then we have Martin Matanda, who asks that this product seems focused on central banks. Can it be used by securities markets regulators? And if so, has that been tried in any market in Africa? If not, what are the constraints that you're seeing?
Simone, do you want to take those questions?
Sure, I can take it. So, Rahel, I'm not aware of any application on FX, and it might be also because it's not really one of our areas of focus. But also in the literature that I've reviewed, there's been no mention of such solution. Martin, I think you are referring to the chatbot. I saw your question was popped up when we were talking about the chatbot, so correct me if I'm wrong. But it can be definitely used also by security markets regulators, and as I said, also can be used as an interface with consumers, but also as an interface with financial service providers that are seeking information and need to navigate complex bodies of regulations to be able to access this information. So I think we also a couple of security markets regulators in sub-Saharan Africa have already contacted us to see if it's possible to work on a chatbot with them. There is also a question from Jordan regarding the length of the time that is needed to develop a prototype. I think for our projects, we've seen that between 6 to 9 months, it's enough time to develop a prototype and sometimes even a full solution. And we hope to get better at it as we continue testing and fine-tuning our processes and approaches. So it's not much time, and I think one of the problems that I said at the beginning is that sometimes central banks or financial authorities issue a RFP for 2 million for projects that require 2 years to be developed, and after 2 years, what you get it's either a black box, a solution that you don't understand how it works internally, or that is not really tailored to your needs, or something that is not even adequate to your needs after 2 years later. So what we try to do, and we will discuss in the next section, is really to bring some of the processes that have been used by the tech industry, by Google, by Apple, Facebook, to develop their own solutions. And we bring them into the work that we do with the financial authorities. So to limit the risk of having lengthy, costly processes that don't give us at the end what we really want. So it's a lot of iterations between on a very short term between the client, the central bank, and the provider, the vendor, with our support. So iteration through iteration, you can develop something that you make sure is tailored in a few months to your need. And regarding the ICT readiness, well, that's a good question. The fact is that we're not, the DSP is not shutting down the other channels. This is an additional channel. So if people don't have a mobile phone at all, or if they don't feel comfortable texting on a mobile phone, they can still write a letter or send a fax, I would say, at the point, or walk in person into the central bank branch. But the point is also that we have done some readiness, some work to understand the readiness. For example, in the Philippines, 50% of the population, as Anef mentioned, it's already using smartphones. So the uptake of mobile phones and more sophisticated mobile phones, it's already quite advanced. But the similar work can be, the important thing for me is that even on a flip phone, the customer can have exactly the same type of support. I don't think there is any other question yet, so perhaps we can move to the next section. Yeah, I think I just covered pretty much these slides mentioning some of the challenges why we don't have Ragtag, SupTech yet. So what is really different in the approach that we have, if you can stay on this slide, thank you. So is using user-centered design and development. What does that mean? It means to build software applications around the need of each different supervisor and regulators. It means that we do design sprints, for example, at the beginning of the process with the central banks, to understand exactly what type of information, what type of data they want to receive, and then tracking down the data to their sources and seeing what technology we can use to bring the data from the source to the final user, to the supervisor. It means understanding how the dashboards should be designed to be more intuitive, and what type of indicator, what type of design there should be for that to be very helpful to digest incredible complex information. So that's an important thing that we have learned and we use from our work in fintech. Making sure that the function, making sure that the needs of the central banks are translated correctly into technical specifications, so that there's no chance to make mistakes, but also that we are harnessing the best technologies that are available. As I said before, like this continuous interaction, and perhaps we can move to the next slide on this. So what does it mean to do this lean development? It means that there are stages that we go through from the production of the proof of concept that sometimes is wireframes, or like it's really a picture of what is possible, what we want. And that's the how we start engaging with the vendors after we have been doing these diagnostics with the central banks, with the financial authorities. And then when the vendor starts working with us on the development of the solution, we start working on prototypes. So there is back and forth testing different approaches, different solutions together with the between the vendors and the central banks that are very involved throughout the process. So there are weekly reports that are digested together with our teams to make sure that the vendor is delivering in time, that we find when we run into some challenges, we still try to find the best solution for the problem. We not go away from what we had in mind at the beginning in terms of final outcomes that we want from the process. And then in some cases, these solutions are really ready for production. So prototypes are sometimes running with mock-up data. They're like good for live testing with a small number of banks or with a limited number of customers. But in many cases, it's very little then to take some of these solutions to full production. When we talk about building APIs, it takes a little bit more because we need to build APIs with all the banks that are involved. And this is something important that I think in 5 years from now, APIs will be the infrastructure of the financial sector. There will be APIs connecting the whole financial sector, all the different financial authorities between them, financial authorities to central bank. It will be like what we did building the railroads, or what we did building highways, building this massive infrastructure that then became the whole communication channels. This will be the way data will be transmitted securely and safely in the future, all across the world. But if we think about the chatbot, it's very close to get from a prototype to production. Yeah, I mean, and we in some cases, like in Nigeria, our team has been building the solutions, but what we do mostly with R2A is to outsource the building the solution to some vendors all around the world. Let's go ahead. Sorry, we don't have much time. Go ahead. Go ahead. So I think what we really have been able to do is to test this type of approach in these countries. And now we're building the cohort for 2019. So if you are interested in testing some of this work or understanding more about these projects, please feel free to connect with us. And we have ways to fund some of these projects, in part matching the funds that the financial authorities or, for example, the FSDs can bring into the project. So we have a skin in the game into the development of these solutions. And we're not only looking for partners to implement, but also for learning partners. So for example, we have a working group on anti-money laundering and SupTech that is now developing a toolkit for anti-money laundering and with new supervision with new technologies. We are developing this report with the BIS. So there are different research activities that we can also, we'll be happy to share with you and involve you in. I don't know if there's time for one or two last questions.
Right, smack on our time, which is 4:30. So we'll not take any further questions. What we will do is we will encourage people to share any questions they might have and follow up with you directly if they would need more information regarding this topic. I think you have shared your emails that people can reach out to, and after this webinar, we will share that again with the participants. So I'd like to thank you panelists so much for taking the time to go through with us this webinar, and all the people who have attended. Thank you so much for attending. We hope you found this very insightful, and we welcome you to keep engaging with us. We can share more information regarding this topic. So thank you so much, and we will be in touch with the recording of the webinar, as well as any other future webinars that we plan to do. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having us, Marion, and thanks for everyone for attending.
Thank you.